This is Beyond the Big Screen Podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen Podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Links to learn more about our guest today can be found in the show notes. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on patreon.com. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen sustainable and get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more and sign up. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
All right, everybody, I know I say this every single time, but I am super excited to talk about this movie. And I'm super excited to talk with the particular individual with this movie. It is Erik Fogg of the Reconsider Podcast. You'll know Erik from so many episodes. I can't even tell them that I dare say world famous episodes we've done on Blade Runner.
Oh, yeah.
But I would have to say Top Gun is a close very close to the top on that one. But today we are going to talk about, I think, one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm a little nervous that I exposed this to Erik because I hope he feels the same way. I had a feeling that this one was going to be one that he liked, but we will see soon. And it is the 2012 movie Looper, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Joe, Bruce Willis as Joe.
Also Joe, yeah.
Emily Blunt, Piper Perabo, Jeff Daniels, and many others. And so I think a good way to get us started today is I believe you had never seen this movie before, and maybe never even heard of it before I had mentioned it. What was your thought of this movie?
Correct. I had never heard of it. And so, audience, we always kind of between episodes, we kind of negotiate what do we want to talk about, right? And we usually Steven's a great host, and so he's like, what do you want to do? And I said you pick for one, come on. And he said, what about Looper? I was like, I had to look it up, but I had to do a little bit of reading about it. I didn't want to ruin the plot. But I had somehow never heard of this. And I don't know how I got away with never hearing about this because I love Bruce Willis and I love sci-fi. And and I do a movie podcast with Steven, so I love movies, right? So something happened, so I missed something somewhere. But yeah, I'd never heard of it, and so it was just I think it's the first. This is the first. This is the first Beyond the Big Screen podcast episode where I'm doing I'm doing a hot take, right? Where I just saw it less than a week ago, and I'm going to be telling you what I think, and so. I'm actually going to save my Roger Ebert criticism for the end, other than saying I had a blast watching it. So thank you for introducing it to me. It's a 1 hour and 56 minutes of delight and a lot of very cool concepts in it, which is our favorite thing to always talk about is what are the themes? What's this movie picking apart? But we also got to talk about the making of and such like that because we love that as well. And my favorite, I actually didn't do the research on the making of the way that I did for a lot of other movies, but because I just decided all I did was watch the movie. But holy simoleons, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is such a convincing young Bruce Willis. It's uncanny. And I don't know if you know what's going on, but let me just tell the audience real quick. Well, if you haven't seen it, you've got to whatever, you know how spoilers work. This is an episode about a movie. And so if you haven't seen it, at least go watch the trailer because you see Joseph Gordon-Levitt look like a young Bruce Willis. That part, I don't know how he pulled it off. Is it, was there facial prosthetics? Was there, is it just makeup? Is there any CGI? But the real delight is seeing Joseph Gordon-Levitt act like Bruce Willis. And that is really, really keen, especially that scene where he meets Jeff Daniels for the first time with the tie, where he's wearing the tie and Jeff Daniels is, from the future and giving him a hard time about wearing a tie. And you see that one side of his face smirk as he's like, he has that Bruce Willis look of like, there's an idiot talking to me and I've got to tolerate it right now.
Yeah.
He's just stuck it so well. I was amazed.
Yeah, I think that if you watch this movie, if somebody doesn't like sci-fi, you don't like multi-universes, you don't like time travel, you don't like it, just watch Joseph Gordon-Levitt act like a young Bruce Willis. That makes the movie right there.
Agreed. Yeah, it shows you just how good JGL is. That because what happens is like normally, you get given a character and then you negotiate, this character and me and kind of stick them together, right? Like Joaquin Phoenix would act, he acts the Joker very differently from Heath Ledger. And some of that's the script and some of that's Joaquin Phoenix and Heath Ledger. But to totally dial yourself in as another well-established actor who has, and the thing is, Bruce Willis's range isn't that wide. Right. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, he's Bruce Willis.
Exactly. Bruce Willis is Bruce Willis in every movie. Right. And so Joseph Gordon-Levitt being able to totally dial himself in to be Bruce Willis shows you just how broad is this guy's range and just how precise is his range. He's like an opera singer, except with his entire body. And it is a masterclass in acting. And really, I think, and the reason it's a masterclass in acting is like, you really truly see the stuff where, and it's the entire movie, the stuff where JGL has to put in conscious effort with how he talks, with his face, with all of his mannerisms, with his pacing, with his body language, with his attitude in order to be Bruce Willis. And you're able to see, this isn't just a guy showing up talking. This is acting with every fiber of your being. Very cool.
Now, the other thing that really makes this movie stick out with me is that with the sci-fi, it took two elements and honored them, and it took that to the full extent. And for time travel, obviously time travel, at least as of right now, is total sci-fi, but they picked the rules of sci-fi or of the time travel, and they stuck with it. They kept it consistent. They didn't change it up or in any way to make it unbelievable. And they made it believable in their universe. And then with the telekinesis is mostly just a parlor trick, except for this one kid. And I think that in those two elements, they didn't take it out of control. They kept it very much within its limitations in the script. It didn't become, oh, this is a time travel movie or this is a telekinesis movie. It was just I don't know if MacGuffin is the correct term, movie term, or plot elements, but they were just two plot elements that we had to believe, and they didn't make them unbelievable.
Agreed. Yeah. It's in particular, the telekinesis for everybody but this one kid is super underpowered. And like, so you see people doing it. And if you, if you're not thinking about the narrative structure ahead of time, you're like, why do we care? And it's a Chekhov's gun. If you like a lot of cinema and theater, you're like, okay, this telekinesis thing is going to become useful at some point. But they establish that it's low powered because if it wasn't low powered, it would radically change society. And so they're like, look, it's super low powered. All people can do is like lift quarters. You're like, okay, who cares? Right. It's a parlor trick. People use it to try to pick up chicks. And then similarly with time travel, like you've got it. Yeah. What they're able to establish is that time travel is big in the future and they're sending stuff in the past here. And so we've contained it. Right. They're able to give you a premise that's plausible where like we're containing time travel to something where the only reason they're sending stuff in the past is to actually there are a few other reasons probably, but the only thing that's like relevant here is it's to assassinate these people and get rid of them. And what that means is like we're not living in a society where we're time traveling back and forth and like trying to solve problems that way, because it gets really effed up really fast. They say, let's keep time travel in the future, except for sending stuff back. And it's a really well designed. Yeah, to your point, Stephen, it's really well designed. Plot elements or like mechanics might even be the word, where we say we're introducing these two mechanics into the universe. That's the sci-fi, and that's it. That's all you need. We establish it early. These are the two things you need to know. We've introduced them in a way that's not too much exposition, and now go enjoy the movie. And they do so many cool things with it. One of them, they do a lot to show you, not tell you, how the rules of time travel work. The best example of this, because you can look up if you want to know more about this, look up rules of time travel, and there's all sorts of different ways of establishing rules of time travel that to try to minimize the number of paradoxes and looping BS. Although we've got some looping BS here, that's one of the rules. But the thing that gets established pretty early is when the one guy comes back in time and isn't killed by his younger self, and this is called closing the loop. When the loop isn't closed and he runs off, when they capture the younger self, what they do is they don't actually torture him, but what they do is they put him under and start scarring him and cutting off parts of him. And then the guy in the future, he's noticing. And so this is one of the things we're establishing. If they mess with your past self, what happens is especially if you're in the same timeline or something, you're able to notice the change, right? You lived that 30 years of having your nose, and then when it was cut off, you never had your nose, but you have this lingering memory of having had your nose that is explained later will fade at some point, but both of those realities are true in your mind at the same time. So this guy can experience himself losing these elements of himself. And so what can happen is you can do stuff in the past that rewrites right now in a way that's prescient right now. It's super well established through this very critical narrative element, which is, okay, we can mess with this guy in the past in order to get his future self to change his behavior in a way that normally wouldn't work, right? And it's how you solve one of those paradoxes of, would they have even been here if you'd have cut his nose in the past? Well, the answer is yes. That's one of the rules we're establishing, and the change is immediate at that point in the future, and probably also all throughout his memory. So it closes that, it ties that bow really well. I really, really liked how they established that for us early on, and then to your point, stuck with it, and it was key that they stuck with it.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Richard Lim's This American President and other great shows. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more, and here is a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah, and they didn't belabor it. It was a fact at that point, and you could just deal with it, and it establishes that it's a deterministic timeline. What happens now is going to affect the future.
Right.
It's not multiple universes. It's not any of this stuff. It's what happens now is going to affect the future. And I also like that the time travel, in the future, so the movie takes place, and I think I think they do give a precise date. It was maybe around the 2040s is where the movie actually is established. And then the time travels 30 years ahead of that.
Right.
And I liked how they ban time travel in the 30-year plus future. And it's basically, it's almost like how it seems like every technology happens, then criminals get a hold of it. Yeah. And it's a pretty low grade criminal enterprise.
Or so it seems. I mean, we're not talking about it's not the FSB, right, that's using it, or the old former KGB. It's not the KGB that's using it. It is it's a mafia for sure. And these guys, it's clear that their objective is to make money. And so the reason they kill people is those people are problems. Although when Rainmaker gets involved, you wonder why he's closing all these loops, and then you find out, right? Although it's never told to you, which is very cool. It's just kind of obvious if you're paying attention to the plot. So to some extent, they're low level, although I don't know if they're as low level as they seem, because they're criminal syndicates, and we think criminal syndicates, how bad are they? The Mexican cartels are the worst of them. But it's also clear that they've got all these Gat men in the past who work with the police in the past, right? So we see the Gat men and the cops from 2044 teaming up to go look for the Joes. And so it does make me think that these guys are pretty embedded into they've established the ability to corrupt the system much in the same way that like the Chicago gangs did in the Prohibition era and stuff like that. And so in some ways they're quite powerful, but they're not like a government or a military or anything like that. Yeah, for sure.
And another thing is that in the 2044, the U.S. is in pretty bad shape. It's high crime, somewhat a little to maybe getting into things that are a little too hitting close to home right now for us in the 2024.
Yeah.
But they've made it clear that Europe is maybe in a little bit better shape. And then China is at this point, the shining city on the hill.
Yes. Not just because Jeff Bridges tells Joe's, Jeff Bridges plays Abe, the boss of the Loopers. He doesn't just tell young Joe, go to China. I'm from the future, definitely go to China. But we also see when these guys turn in their silver that they get from their jobs for cash, what kind of cash do they get? They get Chinese renminbi. You see these red bills with Chairman Mao on them. And it's just a little flash. It's one of the, I love good world building, right? You just get this little flash that even now in 2044 in the United States, the preferred currency is now the Chinese renminbi or yuan. But they never have to say it. And that's very cool. We see the US is in decline. We see it looks like Europe will be, is what Jeff Bridges is telling us, and that China is on the rise. And but it's not like Firefly where like everybody's speaking Chinese because like it's just not there yet, right? We're just seeing this transition of power.
I think one of my favorite scenes is in the first loop. Young Joe kills old Joe, and that's what sets he's closed the loop. Then he gets the gold, and then he can turn his money into renminbi. He moves to China. His initial thought was that he was going to go to France, and he's learning French and everything. But whatever Jeff Daniels says sticks with young Joe, even though young Joe at this point is a drug addict, and even in his initial loop and some sort of drug that they put drops in their eyes, but that they do a montage of young Joe turning into old Joe, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt looks older and older and older. Then he turns into Bruce Willis. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, it was. It was amazing. And we see that like he fundamentally doesn't change, right? He's like until the end. I think like at year 25 out of 30 of his lease, essentially his literal lease on life. He when he meets this woman who slaps him, but like he's just a playboy drug addict and still an assassin the whole time. He gets all this money and he's still blowing up. And but then when he meets her, like she cleans him up, and you see Bruce Willis like in her arms shaking from withdrawal and stuff like that as he falls in love. And it's a little bit, what I don't love about that is that to some extent, like the women, their primary role is as like caretakers and nurturers, and you're like, it's a little bit of a stereotype. It was 2012. We got to remember in 2012, like, same-sex marriage wasn't legal in many places in the United States, and marijuana wasn't legal in a lot of places in the United States. It was a different time 11 years ago. And so, you go like, okay, if we were to make the movie now, we'd probably think about how we treat women in the movie a little bit differently. But other than that, you see actually the reason that's so important is you see this parallel where old Joe, what's interesting is old Joe is the one who's like, who craves this motherly attention and being taken care of and is obsessed with his wife, this woman who ends up being killed. And that's the driver of the plot is he's like, no, I'm not going to let myself die. I'm going to fight in order to kill Rainmaker as a kid in order to stop my wife from dying. Right. That's the whole plot driver. And young Joseph Gordon-Levitt, he's also like, not nursed back to health, but he's brought out of his withdrawal because of another woman who is also a caretaker, but a conventionally bad caretaker, or at least former bad caretaker, who abandoned her son and now is like traumatized and really tough, and and also he's just some stranger, and so she's tough on him and like shoots him with rock salt. And so instead of like falling in love with her as the like more child-like character, the way that Bruce Willis's old Joe did to his wife, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's younger Joe transforms into a like partner and protector figure, who and like this is where these Joes diverge. Is old Joe stayed selfish the whole time, right? And he thinks young Joe's a piece because he was. But young Joe, in meeting this woman, and this is where like the timelines diverge, in meeting this woman and like recognizing what she's going through and recognizing like her love for her son and seeing that, and both of these guys, they talk about their own mother and the very scant memories they have of her. So like motherhood is a big theme here. Anyway, in recognizing that care being given to someone else, his reaction is not selfish, but selfless. And so both of these guys get exposed to motherly nurturing and affection, just directed at, old Joe himself, young Joe to Sid, seeing it to Sid. And they decide that the like target of the mother's affection is the most important person. And thus their paths diverge dramatically.
I wonder what you think of this. Is that I think that old Joe's wife, the Chinese wife, versus, so you have the different women characters. I think that old Joe's wife and then the prostitute, Parker Parabo's character, that they're almost put up as archetypes and in some ways flawed as a replacement mother figure. Like Joe, when young Joe goes with Parker Parabo, like they don't even do what you would do with a sex worker. He just wants to be held. Like he's desperately looking for that mother character. And then the old Joe with the Chinese woman, she almost plays into all of his selfishness. She takes care of him, she mothers him, and then she ultimately dies for him because of his stupidity, more or less. Yeah. And then they're all come together so they don't have any, I guess you might say, agency, where Emily Blunt, she has ultimate agency. She's a flawed mother character, but she has choice now whether to, she's desperately trying to be the boy's mother again, but she can't, and she's going to have to do something to ultimately get her, because she's screwed up being a mother and a caretaker this whole time. And she has to earn a redemption at some point that Joe gives her. All the other mother characters have suffered because of Joe. Now Joe can come around and basically make it right.
Yes. And I think the growth we see from Joe is, that's triggered by seeing how much she cares for this kid, even though the kid is kind of a punk, because like she even says like, I don't care if he loves me as long as he's safe and happy or something like that. And Joe, like you can see him kind of blink because he's just kind of like baffled at seeing selflessness, because he's a party animal drug addict who hangs out with a bunch of assassins, right? It's like kind of the scum of the earth. And and we even see early on in the movie, he's so selfish, he's willing to sell out his one friend to not lose half his stash.
Yeah.
Right. To not lose money. And Jeff Bridges calls it, right? He's like Babe Ruth. He like points to the stands on the left of the field. And he's like, this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to you and then you're going to turn him in. And Joe's like, what? I'm a tough guy. Are you kidding? Nope. It's because he knew where to hit him where it hurts. Yeah. It was in his pocket because he's that selfish. And seeing that transformation throughout the movie, in particular because of his exposure to his older self, and in contrast, his exposure to Sarah is key. And one of the things I really like in the movie is I'd expected old Joe to be like the wiser one, who like is, you expect that, right? Old guy comes back, Bruce Willis, right? Of course, he's going to like teach the young guy something about, a little something, but he's got it backwards, right? And so what you see is this guy who has not become wiser as he's gotten older, though he has in some ways, but who's like whose worldview has collapsed just to focus on himself. And it reminds me, actually, I was talking to a friend's daughter who was like, she's very good at being like, learn first rather than show off first kind of person. But she was talking about, she's like 14. She was talking about her ambitions. And she's like, yeah, but until I'm as old as you, and I'm in my late 30s now, I should really be learning. And I smiled at her. I said, like, man, wisdom's overrated, right? It's good, but it's far from everything. And in her case, what I meant was like, use your fuel and ambition while you got it. Cause like your 20s, you can get a lot done, and do some amazing stuff. But it's also the case that, what we see here is we expect the trope of the older guy being the wiser one when, one, wisdom wasn't really required here. It was compassion and character that are required here. And two, you see, he didn't get wiser, right? And that doesn't happen to everybody. You don't always get wiser when you get older, or at least not wiser in terms of knowing right from wrong. You might get a little street wiser, but you don't necessarily become a better person. And turning that on its head was really delightful, because I kept for a while kind of expecting, especially because early Joseph Gordon-Levitt just wanted to kill Bruce Willis because he was selfish. And so like you just expected at some point for like Bruce Willis to be the one that gets through to him. Not at all.
You see that exists. Both of those possibilities exists in him at the same time, that he does have compassion, but then he does have the ultimate in brutality. He sells out his best friend for the silver, like you said. And at least initially, when Bruce Willis goes back to 2044, you think that he wants to kill the Rainmaker. Yeah, he's killing a child, but the Rainmaker they set him up. He's a monster in the future. And you think, well, maybe Bruce Willis really does want to take out the Rainmaker to make the future better. But then it really does come out that he's doing it just to make it so that his wife doesn't get killed.
Yep. Yeah. He does not care. He just wants her to live. And and therefore he's willing to, he very much believes the ends justify the means, because he's not trying to think about the bigger picture. He murders 2 children.
Yeah.
Right. And tries to murder a third. And it is the case that like, what I do love is like, there's a little bit of grayness in the morality. And I kind of felt myself going back and forth on how I felt about this, because you see this kid who is clearly got some degree of psychosis going on, right? Possibly sociopath. I'm not a psychiatrist, but like he's clearly messed up, and very angry and very possibly narcissistic, whatever. He's got some sort of psychosis and deep anger, and he's ultra powerful. And so like when Bruce Willis is like, yeah, he needs to die, you're like, yeah, I get it actually. And there's this amazing irony in, the climactic scene where Bruce Willis, who is so angry and so in love with his wife who took a bullet for him, is willing to shoot the mother who is willing to take a bullet for her own son, when Bruce Willis is just trying to clean up for his own good, the same way that the Gatmen were coming to clean up for their own good, right? It's just like he's the monster he came to destroy, right? He'd become that. And the best part of the movie is, and I just didn't see this coming, was when Joseph Gordon-Levitt, young Joe, realizes that, that's the reason for this loop. The reason for this loop is because he transforms into the monster that he comes to destroy, and he actually creates the very monster that he wanted to destroy by murdering his mother. And, when we know from the first time that when this kid thought his mom was murdered, when it was his aunt, he was like, oh, my problem was I wasn't strong enough and tough enough. And so, like, we're going to just murder his mom again, again. And like, guess what's going to happen? This kid is going to become nightmare fuel. And, but he recognized that what the kid needed was not someone to try to destroy him, but someone to try to heal him, and nurture him. And it was taking that away. That was the nail in the coffin, not just letting him live. And so they're like, we recognize there are other ways to change the future, other than destroying everything that's scary. And, you even think about like, people talk about going back in time and like assassinating Hitler. It's like, well, if you just go back in time and like replace his babysitter with someone a little bit nicer, what happens? The whole world could be different.
With a lot of the movie, the things that surprised me is it was full of surprises. Like they actually show, or they don't show it, thank goodness. But they make the implication that old Joe took out 2 of the kids who were born at the same time at the same hospital. Like movies don't generally go there, but you needed that in the plot to show the twist. It was not gratuitous, because if it was gratuitous, they would have shown him doing it. But they needed to do that to show that old Joe was willing to do anything to restore his life.
Yes. There's no ambiguity of to whether it happens. You hear the it goes to black, but you hear the gunshot when he's like looking at the kid, and then you see him afterward. And this is where you see like the humanity left in him, because there's always, Joe could always go both directions. He can always make the choices of who he wants to be, because he's not so up that he's just fated to be a monster, right? He just chooses to be because he's not able to see outside of himself. But like after he kills the first kid, right, you see him like, they make a point of like showing him crying, because he's like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Right. This guy who's probably killed hundreds of people on contract. He goes and he kills a kid, and he's deeply, deeply moved by it. Not that it stops him.
No, it never stops him.
Yeah.
But we need to see that development in him, that inside of old Joe and young Joe, there's the propensity for good, there's the propensity for evil. Yes. And he has the choice for both of those. And we keep talking about them as 2 separate characters, but then you always have to go back in your mind. They're the same person.
Yeah.
And we can make different choices. And I think it inverts as well, like you're saying with the wisdom, but it's also, I would generally say that somebody who's older they have both propensities in them, that maybe they are going to be more good, but also you have a lot more to lose as well, because what has happened.
Yeah. No, it's true. Although maybe the reason I don't think he's more good is like we see what happens during the first 25 years of his montage. And you'd think like his wife turned him around in the last 5. But the first 25 years, like he's throwing grenades into cafes and he's still partying, right? And that stuff, that stuff will melt your brain at some point, right? Like I know Dare wasn't perfect, but like the, fried egg and so you think that like this woman has taught him something, but she's actually not taught him anything. She's just like, she's enabled his childishness by being his mom. And so, I think it is also, the story I choose to believe is that this guy chose the path of selfishness and corruption over and over. Right. And it started with selling out his friend, and in order to have money, in order to retire, because he just kept thinking about what can I get? And so he just kept, then he just kept murdering people and, partying and trying to just have fun. And he found a different kind of paradise in this woman, but never learned what it meant to like contribute in any way or be a positive human. And I think he came out of it messed up in the end as well. And that's at least my story on it. But to your point, it's also the case that he, he's seen, and this is where you have some sympathy for him, and you go back and forth because he's seen what Rainmaker did and is doing, right? And Rainmaker is like, Rainmaker has a reign of terror on these syndicates. And the reason Rainmaker does is because it's for the same reason, right? Because his mom got killed. So for Bruce Willis, it's his mom figure. For the Rainmaker, it's his literal mom and aunt, who he thought was his mom, get killed. And so he's like, I'm just going to kill. And it's because of people going back in time to kill them. So he's like, I'm just going to end all these people going back in time so that they can't go back and hurt my mom. And again, it's just the parallels between Bruce Willis's character and Sid the child are so deep, and it takes a hot minute to see them, which is very cool.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
That's what I love about this movie, is that it's really more deep than it ought to be for a 2012 sci-fi movie with Bruce Willis. When I first saw it, I didn't see it in 2012. I maybe saw it for the first time 5 years ago. And it was something on Netflix, and I just popped it on as something, I like Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Emily Blunt and Bruce Willis as much as the next guy. So and I like sci-fi. Let's go. Yeah. And it is way deeper than it ought to be.
Yeah, I agree. It really looks like an action movie that's meant to be a little bit more like when I first saw it, it's like Looper, just time travel and such. I was like, oh, it's going to be kind of like I don't know, maybe like 12 Monkeys meets Inception. And 12 Monkeys was very good and had Bruce Willis. And Inception was also very good and had Joseph Gordon-Levitt, right? And so it's like, oh, smash these two things together. Like, you get a baby, and it's a time travel action movie about like Bruce Willis time traveling, and it's weird. And it wasn't that. It was actually like a drama with action and like crime noir, and because like you have that like old guy coming back, be like, they killed my wife, yeah, right? You're like, oh, snap, right? And he's out for revenge and all that stuff. And but your deeper themes, Inception asks one question, which is like, what is real? And 12 Monkeys asks a little bit about determinism, because like at the end of 12 Monkeys, like no matter what they do at the end, Bruce Willis dies and the plague gets let out. And like, there's this sense that maybe it's deterministic and you can't stop the past. And no matter how much they try. But in the case of this movie, the fact that you have this like deterministic box to play in, and you have these people thinking that they're stuck on this path that they just have to respond to, and not recognizing that they can change the path, and then finally recognizing that they can change the path, you get these much, much deeper themes about human choice and human nature and ethics. And like, yeah, it's a movie about choice and ethics that like was not, that like happened to have a little bit of sci-fi in it, which it's sugarcoating on your philosophy of medicine, and it really works for me perfectly, just like Blade Runner.
What I would like to have seen more of is they really only have that one scene in the diner where young Joe and old Joe talk it out. I'd love to have seen a little bit more of them hashing it out, because I mean, imagine you meet your 30-year-old older self. I mean, I think that would lead to something a little bit more than what they talked about. And yeah, they were in a stressful situation that they didn't have time. Young Joe wanted to kill old Joe to close the loop and be done with it. Old Joe basically didn't care about young Joe. He was just in his way. But I think they could have found a way to get something a little bit more philosophical between the two of them.
Yeah. And it is a little disappointing. And it's one of those things, it's like, it's a path diverges, because you also got the sense early on that like when old Joe has to save young Joe, when he's like running out of his apartment and falls on the car and is like knocked out, you're like, oh, they're gonna have to work together now, right? They're gonna like buddy up, and it's like a buddy cop movie now. Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what's gonna happen, right? Not at all. And they become mortal enemies. And so the twists are very cool. And yeah, so that's why I thought it was going, and you're going to get a lot more of this stuff. And I could see prioritizing it out, and maybe worrying that like getting them to talk more got a bit ham-fisted at some point, or gets a bit ham-fisted at some point. But actually, I think the scenes where Bruce Willis is doing things like talking, I mean, a couple of Bruce Willis scenes, including that one, are some of the best acting, or I think maybe the best acting I've ever seen from Bruce Willis, right? Because like, in 12 Monkeys, he's like very over the top. In in all the diehards, he's just Bruce Willis being tough. And so you have to think for a while about, where do you see this guy really open up? Especially in dialogue, and especially in, emotion. And it's very rare. Even the scene where he's like gunning down the Gap Men when he's assaulting, Abe's, Abe's Looper joint. it's just, I don't know. There's something that's like a little more emotional and powerful about the guy where like you're kind of rooting for him, even though he's kind of evil. You're not sure if he's evil yet at that point. And, you know, he paints a very sympathetic picture who's like very, very, has this, here's the word, multidimensional, which is like not a word you apply to Bruce Willis generally.
It really does play with your emotions and play with your expectations the whole time. He's killing people, he's killing children, but he still has that kernel of good in him, and that maybe good can come out of it. And then young Joe, when in the end, when he kills himself, and to close the loop, that blew me out of the water.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't see it coming. Maybe I should have, because you think he's going to kill old Joe.
Yeah,
right. You're
like happily ever after.
Exactly. But yeah, he sees that the only way, because it's this big circle, the only way to prevent this period is he's got to die long before this happens. And he, you know, the number of people that are saved by this, although the assassins continue, you know, you still have these like 5 syndicates and assassins, and, you know, maybe the reign of terror over this, you know, over the assassin syndicates and the shutting down of the assassins isn't so bad. And that's maybe the other thing to think about is people like, oh, reign of terror, we need to stop it. It's like, reign of terror over whom? The mafia? You know, you're murdering a bunch of assassins. Maybe it's not so bad. But the most important thing is we see that the choice of compassion rather than destruction is, you know, what the directors want us to take away as this like lesson that, you know, you try to solve all your problems by shooting them, you're just going to create, you know, you will create more problems. You know, Batman says, you know, if you kill a killer, the number of killers in the world stays the same, which of course breaks down at some point, because if you kill 10 killers, there's 9 fewer. But anyway, the point here is that the path of just trying to kill everything, you know, Sid has this problem in the future, and Joe has this problem as an old man, just trying to kill everything that's a problem for you, doesn't seem to solve the problem.
As a closing today, since this is really the first movie that we've talked about that really wasn't a passion of yours.
All right.
What's your ultimate hot take? Could this become a passion?
Ooh. Thanks for asking. You know, it's funny. I'll confess, I didn't like Blade Runner the first time I saw it, and it became my favorite movie of all time. Now, part of the problem is I saw the original cut the first time.
Yeah, that's
it makes such a big difference. And so I do think some of it takes me like time and rumination. Actually, sorry. There was one instant favorite, which is Mad Max Fury Road. I instantly knew I would love that forever. But anyway, point being, otherwise with sci-fi, like so much percolates in the background, and like you kind of discover so much more watching it again and thinking about it more. That's a sign of some really, really great sci-fi there. And, you know, you listen to Beyond the Big Screen, you get to shortcut a lot of that because we're guiding you through a bunch of it. But I do think that the themes here are, so I'm going to go with tentative yes. I think this could become one of my great passion movies for a couple key reasons, right? It really does, you know, if we follow the patterns of movies that I love, you know, in particular stuff like Blade Runner, you just get, you know, you have a lot of the same stuff. You have expectations that are built up during the movie that are then busted down. You have deep, open question themes about human nature and right and wrong. You have some great action that really drives the plot forward. You have really good show don't tell, storytelling. So it's got all the parts of a like Eric Fogg classic, that's for sure. And I was just not. I just didn't know what to. It's funny, I didn't know what to expect, and the movie kept messing with my expectations over and over. And so you kind of come out of the end of it going like, "Wow, you know, this is like tour de force of like 8 movies in a trench coat kind of." And so I want to watch it again, but I'm very tempted upon analysis to say yes, I think this is going to become a classic.
I think this is the type of movie you watch it the first time. Maybe you watch it with your significant other or with some friends, but then this is the type of movie that you're going to sit down at 8:00 on a Wednesday because you need to unwind and watch it by yourself with like your headphones on and really think about it. That's how it's one of those movies that I'll just come every year or so. I need to watch Looper again.
Yeah. I think each time that, again, it's a sign of a great movie. You know, if those of you who like really liked the Blade Runner stuff that we did, I'm sure you went and watched it again and went like, oh my gosh, there's a lot more here than I saw originally. And so I suspect, you know, I can only imagine what more I'm going to get out of Looper the next 2 or 3 times I see it. But here's the good news. I'm definitely going.
Shows, go over to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more. And here is a quick word from our sponsors.